Hello, Michael. Today's question is trying to be disciplined and falling into laziness are two extremes. How can we lead an orderly life without wanting to perfect the character, but also not falling into laziness, idleness, and procrastination?
Um, it's all a matter of motivation. If we're very interested in achieving something, say we're interested in some worldly achievement, um, we, because of our interest in that, we are very energetic working towards that. We are only lazy towards the things that don't interest us. If if uh, if I'm not interested in a certain activity, supposing I'm not interested in football, and you ask me to come and watch a football match with you, I'll say, not today. I'll just rest at home, because we're not really interested. But if I was passionate in football, oh yes, let's go and get a ticket and somehow we'll go and watch that football match. So all activities are driven by our, our, our interest in things. People who are lazy, who are idle, who avoid doing things, it's because they find they find work. It's not worth working for things. Let us just be lazy out. Let's take life easy. Let's enjoy life. It's because of lack of motivation, but they're not. It doesn't mean that they're selfless. I mean, many lazy people, they enjoy just being couch potatoes, sitting at home watching the television or doing non-productive activities, because that's where they find pleasure. Regarding being disciplined, when you have a great interest in something, automatically that introduces a certain discipline in your life. Supposing you're passionate about earning money, you want to become very rich, you want to be a successful businessman or something, you will naturally try and discipline your activities, your life. There's certain things you know that in order to become rich, you need to work hard, you need to do certain activities. So you give up other activities. This is discipline, but it's not right. It is discipline, but it's for the wrong purpose. When we are interested in this path of self-investigation, we won't even feel we're being disciplined. Yes, it is a discipline to turn our mind within, but if we're interested in turning our mind within, it won't seem to be a difficult discipline. It's only when we're reluctant to do so that it seems to be hard work. It's like that with any activity in this world. If you're passionate about, if you've got a job that you're passionate about, that job doesn't seem to you like work because you enjoy doing that. So it's all a matter of motivation. So since it's a matter of motivation, if we are not sufficiently motivated, if we feel, oh, I'm not making enough effort, I should be more disciplined, we can't force ourselves to turn our attention within. What we need to do is to cultivate the interest. We need to read Bhagavan's teaching, think about his teaching, think, why did he tell us that happiness lies only within, and the only way to achieve lasting and happiness is to know what we actually are. The more we think about Bhagavan's teachings, the more motivated we get to try and turn within.
And this, do you think that's because we heard that David Gottman, for example, he said in an interview we had with him also that he said that interest or that passion, that bhakti, to turn within, to to have realization, is something that either you have or you don't, and he is something like I mean, he didn't resort to vasanas, for example. He said that it's either something you have or something you don't. Some people are lucky and they get that, and you get that lucky strike or something. or you don't have. But is that could be?
It is not a matter of luck. That is, we're all going through a process of spiritual development. From the worst sinner to the greatest saint, all are undergoing spiritual development, each at their own level. So how do we get this interest in knowing what we actually are, in surrendering this ego, isn't an interest that just comes by chance. It's because we've been cultivating an interest in that. So now our job now is to continue cultivating that interest by following the path that Bhagavan has shown us. The more we follow this path, the more our Vishaya Vasanas will become weaker and our Sat Vasana will become stronger. So definitely the whole point of any spiritual practice is cultivating that liking, cultivating that interest.
And that interest seems to be, or is connected to how we reduce the outer interest.
Yes, definitely.
Also because
that is there are two types of vasanas. There's Vishaya Vasanas, which is our inclination to go outwards. That's our interest in things other than ourselves. There's Sat Vasana, which is our interest to go. Sat means being. So our inclination just to be. In other words, our inclination to turn within and subside back into the source from which we've risen. So to the extent that the Vishaya Vasanas are strong, the Sat Vasana will be weak. To the extent that we strengthen the Sat Vasana, the Vishaya Vasanas will be weakened. That state in which the Sat Vasana becomes strong is called bhakti. The same state, Vishaya Vasanas become weak. That weakening of the Vishaya Vasanas is called vairagya. Bhakti and vairagya are inseparable. They're the two sides of the same coin. So we cannot cultivate Satvasana without weakening our Vishaya Vasanas. And we cannot weaken our Vishaya Vasanas without cultivating Satvasana. And we do both of these by the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. You can also do in a slower or more indirect way by other practices. For example, if Bhagavan has described in the verses 4 to 7 of Upadēśa Undiyār, Bhagavan has described other practices that you can do with bhakti. You can do puja, you can do japa, and you can do dhyana. And in this order, each one is more effective than the other in purifying the mind. Purifying the mind means weakening the Vishaya Vasanas. How do these practices help to weaken the Vishaya Vasanas? It's not the actions themselves, because you can do the same actions. If you do puja, for example, you can do puja with a desire to. You can worship God hoping that God will bless you and you become rich. That isn't going to purify your mind. That's just strengthening your desire for being rich. But so it's not the action that is purifying the mind. It is the love with which you do the action. That's why Bhagavan says in verse 3, Kartanukakum nishkarmiya karma. Nishkarmiya karma means action not motivated by desire. But he says, kartanukakum, that is done for God. That implies done for the love of God. So it is the love of God that purifies the mind. That is by doing puja to God or by repeating God's name or by meditating on God. We are trying to fix our mind on the thought of God rather than on the thought of other things. So in that way, we are strengthening our love for God and weakening our interest in other things, our inclination to go out towards other things. So these are indirect ways of purifying the mind. They do help, but the most direct and effective means to purify the mind is the practice of self-investigation. That's why in verse 8, he says, verse 8 of Upadēśa Undiyār, he says, rather than meditating on God as something other than oneself, meditating on him as not other than oneself, in other words, meditating only on I, that is the most that is the aneta nomutamam, that is the best among all. That means that is the most effective means to purify the mind.
in the path of Sri Ramana, in part 1, he says, he talks about the puja and japa and so on. And he said that instead of practicing puja or japa and so on, which is turning the mind outwards, why not turning within from the first time, from the very beginning? And because later it's going to be harder to turn the mind from having accustomed the mind to go outwards. So in which way the love for God, puja done for the love of God, is any different from puja? I mean, does it have some qualitative remembrance of the eye, or
no? It is. That is, in the Bhakti Maga, we are cultivating the love for God. That in the early stages, when we're still taking God to be other than ourselves. So by doing the puja or the japa or dhyana, we are directing our mind towards God. And we are trying to withdraw the mind from other things. Supposing you're meditating, that's why he says in verse 7, better than the interrupted meditation, the uninterrupted meditation, like the flow of ghee or the stream, is better. Why? Because if we're meditating, if our mind is constantly, if our thought of God, if the thought of God is constantly being interrupted by thought of other things, that means we don't have so much love for God. We've got more interest in those other things. So we are trying to bring the mind back to the thought of God. But trying to do this just by force is not going to work. We have to have that love for God. So we have to think about God, how kind he is, how much he's helping us. And that is why all these bhakti practices, they're all in the aim of all bhakti practices is cultivating that love for God or strengthening the love for God. And to the extent we've got love for God, we lose interest in other things. But sooner or later, but we're still taking God to be something other than ourselves. So our mind is still going away from ourselves. That is why when the bhakti reaches a certain level, then God has to appear in the form of guru to say, the God you are seeking is within you. The God you are seeking is that which is shining in you as I. Turn within, know yourself, then only will you know God. So all these bhakti activities, that puja, japa, and dhyana, these are all activities of body, speech, and mind. All these activities are for cultivating the love. When the love is sufficiently strong, we will then, the mind will be purified, because the more our love for God grows, the less we have interest in other things. The interest in other things, that is the impurities in the mind. So the mind is getting purified. To the extent that the mind is purified, it is thereby clarified. So when our love for God grows, it'll be very easy for us to, it'll be easy for us to accept and to recognize, yes, God cannot, who am I other than God? How can there be, that is, God alone is real, God alone exists. So who is this I who rises to, as if separate from God? So that willingness to give ourselves wholly to God, to turn within and surrender ourselves, that all gets cultivated. So these other means, they're suitable for people at a certain level. But ultimately, whatever other path we may follow, we have to come to this path of self-investigation, because it's only by turning our attention within that we can eradicate ego. And eradication of ego is the total surrender of ourselves to God. And only when we have surrendered ourselves to God are we swallowed by him, and does he alone remain.
Yes, because I've seen that. Yeah, when I don't do the things, for example, I like, for one thing or some other, for one reason or another. If I quit doing the things I like, for example, for several times, this law is, it seems as if it grows very much.
Yeah.
It seems like it takes the front burner, as you say, they say in America. It's like the seems.
Yeah.
Then when the interest comes back, it is like this interest goes back and it's reduced or something.
Yeah.
And sometimes it seems like, it's just a matter of attention, of course.
Yes. The more we attend to something, the more real it seems to us. So by constantly thinking of God with love, that God becomes bigger and bigger, and other things become less important. The only worthy goal in life is God. If we have that attitude, the more we think of God, the more interest in other things will drop by. If I'm in need of something, if God thinks I need it, he will provide it. So that this is how the love and the surrender is cultivated by these other practices. But these are all good preparations, but none of them are as effective as turning our mind within. That's why Bhagavan says this is parabhakti. This is practice of self-investigation, and thereby being as we actually are. That is parabhakti tattva. So those first 9 verses, 10 verses of Upadēśa Undiyār, they're very, very significant. What Bhagavan is teaching us there. People say, oh, Bhagavan has also taught Bhagavan has also said puja is good, japa is good, dhyana is good. That's not the point. What exactly is he saying there? Yes, puja is good. Yes, japa is good. Yes, dhyana is good. But better than that, these are all tributaries. Tributaries are good because they lead to the main river, but only the main river is going to lead you to the ocean. So the main river is in self-investigation. All these tributaries are good, but we don't want to hang around in the tributaries. The purpose of the tributaries is to get us to the main river, and the purpose of the main river is to get us to the ocean.
Yeah, and all is led there about the same practice. I mean,
Yeah.
reducing our interest is
Yeah.
the same practice.
Exactly.
And reducing even the agamya is also
Yeah.
the same practice. Everything is
Yeah.
done through that only
Yeah.
practice. Yeah.
And then the next 5 verses of Upadēśa Undiyār, verses 11 to 15, where he talks about the yoga maga. What are we doing in yoga maga? You're by pranayama or by other techniques, you're trying to withdraw your mind from other things. So you're reducing the outward going inclination of mind. The problem is, if you just stick with pranayama or any other yoga technique, the most you can achieve by it is manolaya. And achieving manolaya is no use, because sooner or later you're going to come out of it again. That's why he says in verse 13 that subsidence or dissolution of mind is of 2 kinds, laya and nasa. That which is in laya will come again. That which is in nasa will not come again. So that is not the solution. So how to go beyond this laya? I mean, obviously when we're in laya, we can't do anything. We have to wait till we come out of laya again. But how to achieve something beyond laya? He says in verse 14, but the mind which will be restrained by breath, by controlling the breath. If that mind is sent on the bari is a very nice term Bhagavan uses in Tamil, because bari means path, or it has 2 meanings there. One is it can be a poetic contraction of aurum. It's the root of a verb that means to investigate or know. So bari, one meaning is aurum bari, path of investigation. That obviously when Bhagavan talks of path of investigation, he means self-investigation. Another meaning is all can mean one. So we have to take to the one path. What is for Bhagavan? What is the one path? It is only self-investigation. So there are 2 meanings. There are 2 ways we can interpret it, but both interpretations imply the same thing. So it's only when the mind is sent on this path of self-investigation will its form die. So there also he's showing even yoga, the yoga is used, that is in the Yoga Sutra, it said yoga chitta vritti nirodha. That is, what is yoga? It is restraining the mental activity. But merely restraining the mental activity is not an adequate goal in itself, because we restrain mental activity every night when we go to bed. When we fall asleep, all mental activity comes to an end. So we have to go deeper than that. We want to bring about the permanent cessation of mental activities. What is the root of all chitta vrittis? is the aham vritti, because it is I who am thinking. It's I whose mind is. So what is that I, that aham vritti, that thought I? What is that? That's what we need to investigate. Only when we investigate that first thought I will all vrittis come to an end permanently, because the root is eradicated. So though in the first 15 verses of Upadēśa Undiyār, Bhagavan is talking about other paths, but he's just showing how those other paths must lead to self-investigation. So Bhagavan is very one-pointed. He's only concerned about I, because it's only, the whole problem is I. Now, what is the problem? Ego. But what is ego? Ego is nothing but a wrong identification. Instead of being aware of ourselves just as I am, we're aware of ourselves as I am Carlos or I am Michael. That it is the I mixed with adjuncts. So so in order to separate I from adjuncts, we need to investigate what this I actually is. When we see what I actually is, it'll be totally, that is when we see what we actually are, we will no longer mistake ourselves to be anything else. So thereby we separate ourselves from all adjuncts. And seeing ourselves without adjuncts is seeing God, as he says in verse 25, I think.
And it seems paradoxical because it's through self-inquiry that it's all those other goals are achieved also. The control of the breath, the subsidence of
everything.
thoughts,
That's
so
what he says in verse 10 of Upadēśa Undiyār. Subsiding and being in the place from which we rose. The place from which we rose means our own real nature in I am, because we rise as ego from I am, because I am alone is the fundamental reality. So subsiding and being as I am, that is karma and bhakti, that is yoga and jnana. So this is the culmination of all spiritual paths.
Yeah, exactly.
So other paths are useful only to the extent that they lead us to this path.